Hi, everyone. Today, what we're going to do is get into the third connection that LaRoe makes between social class and parenting. We'll be looking at how families interact with their kids' social institutions. Before we get there, a brief recap of kind of what we've done so far, and then we'll kind of revisit these chapters like we did with the first two connections, like we looked at language use last class, and like we looked at daily life organization in the earlier part of the book. So overall, last time we looked at different uses of language within the family when it comes to parenting kids, and well, kind of recognizing why we see differences. We had to go back to those class-based resources, such as time. So if you have a lot of time on your hands, it makes it much easier to kind of have the fluid kind of back and forth conversation. But if you're short on time, usually a parent has to be more direct to the points and kind of less time for a lot of the back and forth. Education was another factor. If you've gone through, a lot of things on your own, you can kind of know what's needed. You have kind of a wisdom you can pass down to your kid. So if you graduated college, if you made it to, the top of the business world, you kind of know what it takes to get there, and logic, reasoning, negotiation skills, all those things that we talked about. You can try to foster and cultivate in your kid. But if you don't, if you haven't gone through those experiences, if you don't know how to play the game, so to speak, then you can't pass down that knowledge to your kid. So overall, that's what we're looking at in terms of different speech directions, different paces of speech, the reasoning skills, speaking with adults. You see these differences between the NG and CC parenting style, but why you see the differences goes back to those class-based resources. And so we said that the CC kids are better off compared to the NG kids because they develop these stronger vocabulary skills, larger kind of knowledge bases. They have better communication skills. And so, again, all those things can help you when it comes to thriving and succeeding in the work and school environments. And, the comfort levels, talking to your teachers and talking to your employers, all these things can have real payoffs if you can do it correctly and use these things correctly. So again, going back to the class reproduction part of the thesis, when the CC kids, have these valuable institutional skills, and the NG kids don't have as many of them in comparison, then again, the CC kids are going to be at an advantage compared to the NG kids to thrive within those settings. So today we'll get into the third and final way LaRoe supports her thesis by looking at how a parent interacts with their kids' institutions. So they look at a few different institutions in the book. Kids going to the doctor, kids in sports, and kids in school. So we'll concentrate on those things for the most part. But we'll be looking at chapters 8, 10, and 11. Kind of purposely kind of taking out chapter 9 because the reason why chapter 9 is in the book is this to show the reader that just because a parent uses a CC method, it doesn't mean that the CC results are always going to be there. So in other words, just because a kid has a lot of formal activities scheduled doesn't always mean that he's going to develop good organization, good time management skills. Usually that is the case, but it's not going to be kind of automatic. And that's what the chapter 9 looks at, where the parent is trying to parent in a CC method, but the kid's not getting the CC results. And so that chapter is there just to show the reader that it's not always 100%, but the patterns are, these other chapters where the kids are getting the higher levels of vocabulary, higher levels of organization, so on and so on. So here we can break down the institutional interactions by looking at kind of the amount of interactions, the direction when it comes to interaction types, and are the parents comfortable? Do they trust the institutional agents, such as coaches and teachers? And what about the compatibility of the interactions with the institution's desire? In other words, is the way the parent is interacting with the institution what the institution actually wants out of the parent? So we'll get into those four characteristics now. So we can look at the CC and NG, again, see there is a difference in terms of the amount, the frequency of interaction. So typically in the NG, they are interacting in terms of kind of doing what's asked of them. And so they'll go to the parent teacher conferences, they'll go to the school when they're asked to. And so in comparison, you see the CC parents are kind of going above and beyond the call. So, not only are they going to kind of the required meetings, but they're, heavily involved in other times as well. So again, the difference you can see is, the CC parents are often kind of interacting with the kids' sports and schools, and the NG parents typically are not as much, kind of a more minimal level compared to going kind of above and beyond the call and the CC parents. So, two-way interactions are more common with the CC parents compared to the interaction direction is more kind of a one-way interaction when you see the NG parents. So in other words, when the parent is talking to a teacher, uh, the teacher typically kind of dominates the conversation when they're talking to the NG parent. So the NG parents, may have a couple questions, but there's not a lot of back and forth. Typically, it's the teacher or the doctor doing the talking, and then the NG parent is more just listening. Where the CC parents, you see more kind of that two-way interaction. They're talking to the teacher just as much as the teacher's talking to them. And they're talking to the doctor, and they're talking to the coach just as much as the doctor and coach are talking at them. So again, you can see the difference in terms of kind of a two-way interaction with the parent and the institutional agent, and more of a one-way interaction in the NG family, where you get the kind of institutional agent doing most of the talking and little talk back from the NG parent. So when you see the CC parents, they're very comfortable in the interaction, and that probably ties into why they do speak more. They're comfortable talking to the authority figure, but they lack trust. And so sometimes, they don't trust the teacher to do what's best for the kid, and they don't trust the coach to do what's best for their kid. And so you see this in Stacy's chapter, where Stacy's mother is very comfortable kind of talking to the institutional agents, but she doesn't trust them to do what's best for Stacy. And so we can compare that to kind of more discomfort going on. The NG parents uncomfortable kind of in these interactions. And again, if you're uncomfortable in an interaction, you're likely to not speak as much compared to if you were comfortable in that interaction. So, here when it comes to trust levels, you see in chapter 10 that, Melanie's mom kind of trusts too much. Like, you're the teacher, what's best. So I'm going to let you kind of take care of everything. And then in little Billy's chapter, you see that there is no trust. The little Billy's parents don't trust the principals, the teachers to kind of do what's best. They're very suspicious of them. So overall, those you start to see what's going on there. And we'll get into why class matters when it comes to comfort levels and trust and all that. So finally, the compatibility of the interactions. So, if you read Stacy's chapter, her mom comes across as kind of that helicopter parent, always kind of involved, telling people kind of how to do their jobs, what to do and not to do. So she comes across as maybe a little bit overbearing. And so you'd say, that's probably not what the school wants. It's probably not what, the sport wants a parent doing. But in actuality, they do want that heavy involvement compared to kind of more the one-way street. And they prefer kind of that two-way interaction because, although Stacy's mom may be a pain, at least they, are doing what's best for Stacy, so yes, you don't want anybody telling you how to do your job, but at the end of the day, if you can you kind of use that information you get from a parent to better coach the kid, to better educate the kid, then that's what you want at the end of the day. Compared to the NG parents, typically they're not giving, the teacher, they're not giving the school a lot of information that could be used to, better educate the kid. And so again, you kind of see that in Melanie's chapter where, she was having some learning difficulties. And if the school would have known about it much earlier, then she would have been much better off short term and long term. But because it was more of that one-way street where Melanie's mom wasn't giving the school a lot of information, then school didn't know, so they couldn't really do anything to help until it was almost too late. So they may not be as kind of overbearing. Um, it may make your job a little bit easier, just in terms of people aren't telling you what to do and how to do it. But actually, people, the teachers, the coaches, they prefer kind of that two-way interaction, and that's why we say, excuse me, that's why we say the compatible parenting style is the CC style, and the incompatible is the NG style. So, like we did with the first two connections, we can look at the role of social class when it comes to creating the amount of interaction, the directions, and the trust and comfort levels. So, one big thing here, as we talked about with language use, is education. So, if you have higher amounts of formal education, often you know how to speak the language. You can speak the jargon, the slang that's connected to, the doctor. Uh, so, when you speak to a doctor, you can kind of speak in the same language compared to, if you kind of lack a lot of formal education, sometimes, you don't understand the vocabulary, you don't know how to speak that, jargon or slang. The same thing when talking to, teachers, sometimes it's a kind of different jargon that they may use in these parent teacher conferences. But if you've gone through college, if you have a lot of formal education under your belt, then you kind of know that language. So you'll be more comfortable, because you're speaking the same language. You'll be more likely to speak back and forth because, again, you understand what's being said and you can speak the language yourself. Compared to, sometimes the NG parents, they don't have that same formal education. And so they weren't really kind of socialized to speak in these kind of formalized jargon ways that you see in a doctor's office or within schools. And so again, if you don't speak the language that well, then you'll be uncomfortable and you'll be kind of less likely to interact in kind of that two-way direction. So education's definitely kind of a big one. Also, you can talk about time. So, when you have a lot of free time on your hands as a parent, it gives you more time to interact with the kids' schools, to interact with the kids' sports. But on the other hand, if you're working, longer hours, kind of abnormal work hours, and you don't have maybe a partner helping you out, then you'd be less likely to be overly involved. Again, I'll do what I need to do, but otherwise, I'm working, I just can't get off. I can't move my schedule around all the time to be heavily involved. So, time's another factor that you see there. You can say, kind of lifestyle as well. So, the teacher, the doctor, the coach may be kind of intimidating to you if you're not around teachers and doctors and coaches a lot. But on the other hand, if the person that lives across the street, the person who lives next door to you, if they're a teacher, if they're a doctor, and then you're gonna be kind of used to them, so that status of being a teacher or a doctor kind of doesn't have as much impact on you because there's normal people compared to, if you're not around doctors a lot, if you're not around teachers a lot, maybe that status is more kind of intimidating for you. So again, you'd be less likely to kind of go back and forth a lot, have a lot of two-way conversation. And then you begin to kind of trust them a lot that, you're the doctor, you're the teacher. I trust you to do what's best for my kid. Compared to if the doctor is just another dude down the street and the teacher is just another person, then you'd be more likely, how to tell them to do their jobs in one way or tell them to do their jobs in another way. So overall, again, to explain these differences, we have to go back to those class-based resources, whether it be money, time, one's lifestyle, education level, all these things factor into creating kind of one parenting style or the other. And so what are consequences of this? So here we see that the CC kids kind of learn how to manipulate institutions. And by that, basically, they make the institution kind of work for them. So rather than, thinking to oneself that, I don't understand what the teacher's talking about, they'll ask the teacher to teach it differently. They'll raise their hand in class and say, I don't understand, we explain it again. And so they expect the institutions to kind of change for them. And NG kids, on the other hand, they think they have to change for the institution. I don't get it. What the teacher's talking about. It's not because the teacher is not doing their job. It's because I don't get it. So you'll be less likely to kind of raise your hand and say, can you explain yourself again, when you think it's on you, rather than the CC kid will think it's on the teacher not doing their job. It's not me. And so, the kid kind of learns vicariously. The kid learns by observing their parents, how to get the institutions to change. And you kind of get the sense of entitlement that, everything should change for you. You should always get your way. And the NG kids don't get that same experience because they don't see their parents kind of out there trying to, change everything for them. So they don't kind of learn that same socialization process, and they don't expect institutions to change for them. They expect institutions to kind of do what they do, and then the kid has to change for the institutions. So again, a sense of entitlement where you think the world's going to change for you, versus a sense of constraint in the NG kids, where you start to believe that I have to change, for the institution. The world's kind of against me, and I have to just kind of make my way through it the best I can. So, overall, you start to see kind of the same pattern emerge, where the CC kids are kind of getting these, different skills. You feel entitled. You learn how to manipulate the system. Make the game change for you. And then the NG kids get more of the sense of constraint within the institutions, where you have to play the game the way it is, rather than the rules are going to change to fit you and your desires. So we'll leave that there for today. And so again, keep in mind, that's the kind of third main connection they make between class and parenting. And during our next class, we'll start to wrap up the book, by going over the conclusion, but also I focus more time on the variable of race. So here, so far, we talked about kind of class being that dominant variable that creates one parenting style over the other. But now we'll get into how race can also be an influencing variable when it comes to parenting. So we'll do that next class, and we'll wrap up the book then as well.